And we're going to go ahead and kick it off with Dabo's comments. Everyone knows, whether you're a Clemson fan or not a Clemson fan, if you pay attention to college football at all, you know when Dabo gets a microphone in front of his face, he's going to say something, and he's a polarizing figure. He just tends to say stuff that just either rub people the wrong way, or, some things get taken out of context, or, he puts his foot in his mouth occasionally. He's just a guy that's going to tell you exactly what he thinks, regardless of the response that's going to be had. So obviously all of this, let's go back and paint the picture for everybody. All of this started with kind of a meme going around social media, which depicted the only 4 universities in major college football anyway to not take a transfer in the 2024 cycle. And those were obviously all of the service academies and Clemson. Clemson being the only eligible school to take transfers that didn't take transfers is essentially what that boiled down to. Obviously, Army's not taking transfers. Air Force isn't taking transfers. Navy isn't taking transfers. They don't allow transfers. So Clemson obviously being that lone wolf, that lone ranger out there, not utilizing the transfer portal. And Dabo was obviously, then he was asked on the ACC network during an interview about being that only school along with the other service academies. And I want to read his quote just so we capture exactly what he said, so that we can respond to it properly. And he said, when asked about being among those 4 schools, he said, well, it wasn't really necessarily like an intentional thing. There were a couple of guys we looked at. They got to love you too. And honestly, every player is technically a transfer. We just signed a whole class of guys transferring from high school. So we like our guys. We like our starters. We had 127 guys go through spring. 125 are still on the roster post-portal. So obviously it's no secret out there that Dabo Swinney and Clemson do not dabble in the transfer portal market. I think we've brought in 2 transfers at this point, one being a former Clemson quarterback that transferred out and then transferred back in. And then obviously Paul Tyson, grandson of Bear Bryant, coming in to be kind of a grad assistant / emergency break glass in case of emergency type of quarterback situation. So not a real transfer there in the true sense of things where you think he's going to come in and contribute and be any sort of big part of this offense. So I went ahead and read the quote, Jordan. I kind of painted the background and the picture. What are your thoughts on this? There's been a ton of reaction throughout social media. Some people are, obviously backing Dabo. Naturally, there's going to be a certain group of people that back him. There's going to be a certain group of people that are completely against everything he says, no matter what. So there's 2 sides of it, and there's some people floating around in the middle that agree and disagree with some of what both sides are saying. So what were your initial reactions when you heard about this? Obviously, as Clemson fans, this is nothing new. We hear about the transfer portal all the time. So just give us your thoughts on this entire situation and what all the responses have been across social media, across YouTube, and even the national media types.
Well, I think like half of the reaction, and I've noticed this to be the case whenever Dabo goes viral for something he says and gets a lot of reaction in the college football world, is because I feel like half of the outrage is kind of just how he relays the message. Dabo is a guy that he's always going to put his spin on it. He's going to put he's going to dress his message up in a Dabo type of way. So like all high school players are technically transfers. Like I get what he's doing, and the message. I think the message behind what he's saying, I think, is fine, and that's and I totally agree with. But I think a lot of the reaction that people get is of how he dresses things up and how he those Daboisms that he likes to use. And I think people just, that seems to rub them the wrong way. It's like, I don't think Dabo takes those comments very seriously. I think that's why he says those things the way he does, and he doesn't. I'm sure he probably doesn't understand why people take those things as serious as they do. But at the end of the day, I think half of the reaction is just kind of how he puts things. But I think the sentiment behind what he's saying, is valid. Clemson did try to, did try to use the transfer portal this cycle. They found a few guys that kind of fit the criteria of what they were looking for, and they didn't come. That's kind of the reality of it. And so I think all of that was fine. Now there is an underlying issue that I think you and I have talked about, and is that we think that it's not that Clemson isn't trying in the portal, or like they're not putting their best foot forward when it comes to transfer portal prospects. I think the approach is just flawed. I think that's kind of the biggest thing with Clemson as far as attracting, they attract guys, but they're not landing them, because they kind of treat it just like they do high school recruiting. And it's like, well, we have a select amount of guys that there's a select few guys that we think are good enough to play here and fit our culture and fit what we want to be. And also, they also have the necessary requirements from a eligibility standpoint, education standpoint, experience standpoint. It's very much they treat it very much like high school recruiting. It's like, we want you to come to campus first. We don't want to extend any offers before you come in, and we see if this is a match. That's how they operated with a few of the offensive line targets that they had over the cycle. So I think that's something that needs to be talked about, and something probably has to change there, because if Clemson does feel like they need to get somebody in the portal and they don't have the means to get that player, that's a problem. And that's something that does need to be addressed, and maybe it's a change in how you pitch these things and all that. But the stuff that Dabo said in that interview was, the main message behind it was, we like our guys. And I think the Daboisms that he put and wove into that message are what set people off more than the actual message itself. Because I think there are a lot of coaches that feel the way that Dabo does about the portal and all that. But it's kind of the reality of college football right now, and they've just gone about it differently. And some coaches have to use the transfer portal, and they like, there's no way they're fielding a competitive team without the transfer portal. And then you have the Kirby Smarts, the Steve Sarkisians, the Ryan Days, that they supplement their roster with the portal, but they're still really good high school recruiting coaches. And then you have Dabo, who I think is a guy that wants to invest in the guys that he brings in from high school, and really only use the transfer portal if they really, really feel like they have to. And we'll see kind of how that kind of continues to evolve, and what steps Clemson needs to do to address needs whenever they do arise. But I just think that the outrage was overblown. I think it was really silly, but Dabo is going to speak his mind, and some things are just, he's going to say stuff and that is going to rub people the wrong way, and he's not really going to filter himself, and that's just kind of the reality of what it is. But some people are hypocrites, and they actually agree with what Dabo says, but because it's Dabo saying it, it's a problem. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's my long-winded answer to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I 100% agree with you. I mean, I think you bring up a lot of points, and I think people kind of don't look at the entirety of what he's talking about, and really the transfer portal as a whole, and really take in all of the factors that go into this, right? Let's strip it down to its most basic form. You kind of hit on it. Dabo Swinney tends to have an innate ability to just be polarizing. When he says something, it tends to go viral because of some of the analogies that he uses, or because of the way that he words something, or the way that he puts something. You can go back to the NIL comment where where he was like, God's, name, image, likeness type comments that he makes. He always makes these, some people call them corny comments, or, off-putting comments, or some people don't like it. That's just who Dabo is. That's how he's always been. He's never changed. He's not going to change the way that he interacts, answers questions, and communicates with the media. And for a lot of fans out there, they're always constantly screaming about, I hate coach speak. I want these coaches to be authentic. I want them to speak, truly and honestly. And then sometimes they kill coaches for doing the exact thing that we all say that we want them to do, right? So that's the first layer of it. But getting aside from that, just talking about the transfer portal and some of the problems with Clemson in the transfer portal is, I do think, like, we made a concerted effort this past season, as soon as the season ended, to bring in one of the biggest needs on Clemson's football team. And we'll talk about it as summer goes and as we start previewing games and all that kind of stuff. The offensive line. We know we have issues along the offensive line. We think we have a lot of talent that can be developed, but it would have been nice to bring in at least a veteran center along the offensive line to kind of anchor these guys and really kind of kick off the Matt Luke era when it comes to Clemson offensive lines, right? But it didn't work out. They went after 4 different guys. None of them, a couple of them didn't even make it to campus. And the reason that they didn't, it's because you're right. The way that Clemson recruits, they are treating the transfer portal like they treat high school recruiting. And if anybody knows anything about Clemson and high school recruiting, they slow play it. They want you to come to campus. They want to meet you. They want to go see you. They look at grades. They look at all these different factors, right? To see if you are a fit for Clemson and what Clemson's got going with the team and the culture and all of the above, right? Well, in the transfer portal, you don't have that kind of time, especially when it comes to the biggest names that enter, okay? The other layer of it outside of that, and some of that probably needs to be, to your point, revisited by Clemson, how they approach the transfer portal and how quickly they're making these offers. Some of that probably does need to be revisited. The other thing is the NIL piece of the transfer portal. Your biggest names, not all, but most, are looking for big NIL payouts. Everyone knows, if you follow Clemson closely, that they don't tend to lead with NIL, even in high school recruiting. What does Clemson mainly use majority of their NIL dollars for? They use it for roster retention. They try to keep the guys in the building that are already in the building. That's where they use most of their funds, right? And maybe there can be some tweaks there. But again, Clemson's not the biggest school out there. They don't have this huge alumni base, right? So again, we've said it in the past. We've talked about it before. They have to be diligent with their NIL funds, right? They're not unlimited. Yep. There are limits to this stuff. So using them the best with the maximum amount of impact, they feel like right now, it could change, but they feel like right now that is roster retention. So that's where they focused at. So that's another layer of it. And then also you got to convince these guys to come to your university. It's not, I know the analogy that has been made before. It's not like going to, Walmart and going grocery shopping and you're just grabbing stuff off the shelf, right? Like, you can't make anyone come to your university, right? You're competing with the other best football programs in the country for all of these guys as well. So, and some of these universities, regardless of whether they're a better football program than you or not, some of them are willing to offer guaranteed playing time. Clemson's not going to do that. They're just not. It's not going to happen. And that's another reason that they are struggling when it comes to landing transfers that they have tried to land, and will continue to struggle going forward if all of that continues. So I think, there's multi-layers to it. It's easy to say, well, just go grab transfers, just bring in a transfer. Well, there's a lot of factors, and it's not that easy. And also, you don't want to just bring people in just for the sake of bringing. Like, I don't
Right.
want Clemson, as much as I believe Clemson should use the transfer portal for certain positions. I mentioned center, right? Defensive or the edge position was a big question mark heading into spring. Obviously, they decided to move Peter Woods over there, move Caden Story over there. And we've seen some development with some of the younger guys that have really stepped up. We saw it in the spring game, right? But going into spring, we really were like, "Ooh, defensive end could be a real issue this year," right? So that could have been somewhere we went in the transfer portal. So I'm not saying Clemson doesn't need the transfer portal; or they shouldn't use it. They should use it when it's beneficial to them. But we don't need to run out here and just bring people in just to bring them in. I don't want them to just go land somebody so they can shut everybody up, right? Who's not going to contribute, who's not going to be a valuable asset to the program. So, I mean, I get part of the frustration by some Clemson fans, but at the end of the day, that's Clemson's philosophy. That's Dabo's philosophy. That's the way that he's going to do it. And I understand some people's viewpoint. They think that it's not possible to win in today's age of college football without leaning on the transfer portal, at least somewhat every single season. We're going to see, because Dabo's going to try to do it. He believes wholeheartedly in high school recruiting. That's where he's going to build his roster. And I don't really see that changing. And I know that irritates a lot of Clemson fans, and some Clemson fans like it. But at the end of the day, I really don't see Dabo changing that philosophy. Recruiting hasn't really fallen off for Clemson. So we'll kind of see how it goes. But I think, to your point and to kind of how you ended it, like, I do think a lot of it was overblown. And part of that's just because it's Dabo Swinney.
Yeah.
He's like I started it off saying, he has an innate ability to just go viral with some of the stuff he says. I wish he wouldn't have said the whole we just signed a whole class of high school transfers. Yeah. Like, that's the kind of corny stuff that I'm like, all right, Dabo, like, you didn't have to say that. Like,
yeah.
You could get your point across without saying that. But again, like, I don't think he's serious when he says stuff like that. He's just like, poking back at the media for constantly asking them these portal questions, because literally every time he gets a microphone in front of him in the offseason, he's asked about the portal. When are you going to take a portal player? Why aren't you taking portal players? NIL, portal, NIL, portal, NIL.
And that's the frustrating thing too, because I feel like this has dominated the talk around Clemson in the offseason. It's really frustrating because in a lot of ways, because yes, I wish Clemson had dipped into the portal for a couple spots.
Yeah.
But it's completely overshadowed the fact that Dabo has overhauled the coaching staff.
Yes.
He made two big hires this offseason, made a massive hire last offseason. They've brought in extremely impact, players, in the 2023 class and in the 2024 class, especially on defense in 2023. You're bringing in 2 5-star wide receivers that we both feel are really high on and feel like could contribute immediately.
Yeah.
You bring back a lot of continuity offensively, despite the struggles. We still feel like this roster has, a lot of talent. And of course, there's a lot of things to like about this team heading into 2024 that have been completely overshadowed because, Dabo didn't take a transfer. And that's kind of the frustrating thing for me, because we have our reserved optimism because, just the past 3 years have certainly been a dip in as far as what we've grown to be accustomed to, but we've seen the steps that Dabo and the program have taken to right the ship beyond using the transfer portal that I think have gone overlooked by the majority of, and I think that's kind of the thing that it just makes me frustrated and annoyed, because it's like, man, it's like I'm tired of talking about the transfer portal at this point, because it's like it's a moot point. It's a moot point. Like,
yeah.
There's not. I mean, sure. I guess theoretically, Clemson could take a transfer tomorrow.
Sure.
But I mean, I'm not betting on that because the window is just for guys entering, and not you can sign whenever your school lets you sign.
Right. Yeah.
But like, I'm tired of that talk because like, man, we could be talking about, oh man, Clemson has really upgraded the wide receiver core. Man, look at all that young talent they have on defense. You know, look at the class that Phil Maffa, is poised to have a breakout season. What does Cade like? I would rather be talking about Cade Klubnik and his development and the questions about that than talking about, oh, Clemson didn't bring in a transfer, or you bring back some key veterans on the defense as well, Barrett Carter, RJ Mickens, like, and you have a really, really good mix of youth and experience along the defensive line and the front seven. It's just like, why really good young defensive backs? Like, why are we fixating on this transfer portal issue when there are a lot of things about this Clemson roster that I feel really good about and think will be successful in 2024, but we can't get past it because it's the only thing people want to talk about regarding Clemson, and that's kind of it's kind of annoying.
I mean, it is absolutely frustrating, and the narrative around Clemson is, as a Clemson fan, to your point, it is really frustrating because it's always about NIL in the portal. That's all you ever hear mentioned. Anytime somebody's making a video or talking about Clemson, it's about NIL in the portal for 90% of it, right?
They probably couldn't name you any of the guys. Like, they don't even talk about names on the roster.
They have no idea. They don't know who TJ Parker is. They don't know who Peter Woods is. They don't know who Khalil Barnes is. They don't know who Brian Wesco is. They don't know who TJ Moore is. They don't know who Christian Bentaker is coming in. They don't know any of these guys that are coming in and improving this roster. They know nothing about Avion Terrell. They think we just lost Nate Wiggins and we have no replacement. We're just lost in the sauce. Like, we got no. If you listen to people that don't really follow Clemson, we have no wide receivers. None. No one knows any wide receivers.
Tyler Brown, Antonio Williams, they don't exist. Jake Brenningstool at tight end. Who's that?
Yeah, Jake Brenningstool. Who's that? I ain't never heard of him. Who's that guy? Phil Maffa. Everybody knows him. But it's frustrating because the narrative around Clemson is Dabo has just dug his heels in the sand. He's buried his head in the sand. He's going, la, 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 la. I'm not paying attention to college football anymore. It's my way or the highway. Well, if you're looking honestly and truly at the moves that Dabo Swinney has made over the past 2 seasons, it's quite the opposite. He has recognized his mistakes. Why do you think Brandon Streeter got fired after 1 season as the offensive coordinator? Was that Dabo Swinney digging his heels in the sand, burying his head in the sand and saying, la, 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 I don't care what you guys say? No, that was him recognizing, okay, you know what? You're right. I did make a bad hire. He doesn't have to come out in the national media and say he made a bad hire. He said it without saying it by firing one of his longtime players and longtime staff members after 1 season of giving him an opportunity. And then he brought in Garrett Riley. Same thing at the offensive line coaching position, right? Brought in Matt Luke, right? Brought in Chris Rumpf. We've talked about the defensive end position and how, we've started to see regression on the amount of impact our defensive ends is starting to have. What does he do? He goes and adds Chris Rumpf, a guy with a really deep coaching career, right? So to say that he's not evolving and not changing, that's not true. He has made changes. We are bringing in talent through the high school ranks. Are we landing the Keon Colemans, the Johnny Wilsons, those type of players through the transfer portal? No, we're not. But we're not freaking 49th in recruiting either. Okay, so I get some of the criticism to Dabo Swinney. Some of them are very justified. But to sit here and pretend like he's not changing anything and he's keeping it status quo and acting like it's going to get better, that's not what he's doing. He has made a lot of changes, mainly on his coaching staff, mainly on the offensive side of the ball, but also some on the defense, right? So, I think you got to give a guy like Garrett Riley time, okay? You got to give Matt Luke time to turn that around, right? Changes are being made at Clemson. And I think they're hungry, and I think they're going to be out to, prove a point, and they're going to be out to show that, they can still compete at a high level in major college football. And I'm not saying they're going to make a run for the national championship or anything like that. My point is just changes have been made, and I'm tired of constantly having to talk about NIL and the portal and not talking enough about guys that we need to see development from and new coaches that we have hired. And hey, do we think these coaches can school these guys up and make enough of an impact for us to have, a step up in 2024 and really improve? Like, those are the conversations that should be out there in the media about Clemson. We should be talking about, hey, what do you think Matt Lute's first season is going to look like? What do you think his first offensive line group at Clemson is going to look like? But instead, we're talking about the transfer portal. Instead of talking about, hey, look at Chris Rumpf over here, new defensive end coach for Clemson. Oh, man, they moved dynamic freshman Peter Woods out to end. Oh, how do you think that's going to work out? What do you think he looks like at defensive end? How do you think Chris Rumpf's going to be able to utilize him out opposite TJ Parker this season? But instead of talking about that, we're talking about the transfer portal, right? So I agree with you. It is frustrating, but at the end of the day, they're going to go with the clickiest story they can, the most polarizing story they can, the one that's going to rile up the most people they can. And I get it because, that's how you pay the bills.
And to that point, like I saw today on Twitter, rivals of all sites, like they tweeted out, the Dabo quote, and they completely butchered what he said. I think they said something like Dabo says the players in the portal aren't good enough to play at Clemson.
No, he didn't.
he literally did not say that, and they didn't post the full quote. They didn't post the video. They didn't say. They left out the part where he said most players aren't good enough in the portal, aren't good enough to play at Clemson, which is.
And why is that a controversial statement?
I don't know, because that's the case at every top program. Most of the players aren't good enough to play at Georgia. Most of them aren't good enough to play at Ohio State, Michigan, Texas. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, he didn't say anything controversial. Like,
that's what I'm saying. Like, people take a statement, and he didn't even say that. But even if he did say that, to me, that's not controversial. Like, right. Of course, most of the players in the portal aren't good enough to play at Clemson. Clemson wouldn't be where they are today if most of the players could just come from the portal and start at Clemson. We'd probably be in a very bad situation.
Yep.
We'd probably be a 4-win team, but instead we're not. Okay. So I don't think that's a controversial statement at all. But again, Dabo Swinney's kind of that polarizing figure. And he just tends to have that effect on people. I think it's, kind of some of his mannerisms and the way that he talks and the way that he explains things, but it is what it is. Everybody knows the deal. And at the end of the day, Clemson's got to go prove it on the field in 2024 and show the improvement and show that these new coaching hires are going to work out and there's going to be improvement. And the trajectory of Clemson is going back towards winning 10-plus games a season versus going backwards that we've been doing the past 3 seasons. So it's all in Clemson's hands. It's in this coaching staff's hands. It's in these players' hands. They can change the narrative starting in 2024, right? So, and that's what has to happen, right? And we'll see. We'll see soon enough. Week one, we will see. We will see.